Excellent. So bonjour. Welcome everyone to our March research workshop session at the Department of Family Medicine. So today it's my honor to welcome Marisa Duval, who is our project manager at the department, and Hounaida, who is our project coordinator and research associate in the research office at the Department of Family Medicine. So today they'll be discussing how to manage your research project. And Marisa and Hounaida, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Maddie, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Maybe before I get too far into this, I'll share my screen, but also just kind of go through some quick housekeeping matters. One being, I think my colleague here, Hounaida, is fluently bilingual. So when we get to the question period, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in either official language, and we will do our best to answer that. Maddie, can you just confirm, do you see my full presentation screen?
Yeah,
perfect. Thank you. Thank you. And I don't think there's any conflict of interest here from either Hounaida or myself's part. And so, as Maddie said, we're going to be reviewing some general project management skills and methods today, some best practices. And then the second part of the discussion, I will hand it off to Hounaida, who then can talk more specifically about research management, as it has its own kind of sets of requirements and phases. So I'll kind of just introduce kind of my background and professional experience to bring some context as to why we're here tonight. So I've been with the Department of Family Medicine since 2018 in a variety of different roles in the central office, but most currently, as Maddie said, as a project manager out of our newly established project management office, or the PMO. And PMOs in general are kind of responsible to ensure that the aim and vision of the projects we undertake align with not only the department's strategic objectives and goals, but the university at large's strategic goals as well. And PMOs can act in a variety of ways, including supportive roles where we could be more like consultants, in a controlling role where we ensure compliance and reporting and certain templates are used, or in a more directive role where we take kind of control over the day-to-day execution of projects. I think my personal background, I hold 2 internationally recognized project management certificates, one being the PMP, which is Project Management Professional, out of the Project Management Institute, and then Prince 2, which is Projects in a Controlled Environment. Throughout my career, I have primarily been involved in projects that have some kind of technology component, whether that be software development, VR applications, e-learning modules, website redesigns, and SharePoint environments as well. And Hounaida, I don't know if you wanted to kind of introduce your background as well, and then we'll get into the
Yeah, sure. Just like Maddie said, I'm the research project coordinator at the DFM, and it's been less than a year now. I've worked in Beirut, Dublin, Dubai, Sydney in different capacity, but mostly around research and learning. And my job here is helping researchers get their project done from the design to the implementation and the final stages of the project.
Thanks. And so you'll see on the screen, though, just a reminder of our learning objectives. And while I've done my best in the beginning part of the presentation to kind of keep things general so that you can apply it to a variety of different kind of projects of different complexities or environments, I do think you'll find some useful tips that can be used anywhere. I should note, though, that this is by no means a comprehensive kind of PMBOK presentation or the project management body of knowledge. It's really, you'll see with any project you deal with, it can be tailored quite effectively to the project you're working on, regardless of your corporate or academic environment. So let me, next one, here's what's on the agenda. Like I said, we'll start with the general overview, go into some concepts, how to manage your project throughout the various life cycles, some best practices and tips we've kind of learned along the way, and then I'll hand it off to Hounaida, who can talk about research management. So I'll start with the very basics. Project 101, what is a project? Defining criteria for a project, it's got to be temporary and unique to create a product, service, or result. If it's not temporary and not unique, it's just business operations as usual. Now your project can become a part of a usual business operation, but projects in general are a bit more risky in that they introduce some kind of risks and opportunities that aren't usually present in your daily operations. And when I say temporary, I by no means mean that your project is the duration or is short. It's just that the engagement level would be shorter or temporary. And just to be clear, a project could be either a product or a service, a component of those products or services, or in the case of research, a result, outcome, or a document that can be used to determine whether trends exist or a new process would benefit society. So, what is project management? So who will do what when? Project management, it really just kind of applies a knowledge set, skills, tools, and techniques to a set of activities to make sure that your project requirements are met on time and within budget. And so you take these kind of approaches to ensure that the main resources, being your people, budget, time, schedule, materials, risks, are all managed as set out in your plan. And when you're taking an official project management approach, you would likely either become or assign a project manager whose responsibilities could vary, again, depending on your academic or corporate environment, but usually the project manager controls all aspects of a project, including scheduling, planning, overseeing performance issues, preventing any kind of conflicts that may arise, or dealing with the conflicts as they do arise. Again, just to make sure that your project objectives are met. And as you can see, there are several types of project management methodologies. I have put up here on the slide kind of two main ones that you might be familiar with, especially in the software development or technology kind of background. There's the waterfall approach, which, as the name kind of indicates, is a linear process where you plan your objectives by task, and you don't really go on to the next task until your first one is finished. Or there's the agile approach, which again, the name kind of hints that it's more flexible, kind of iterative process. No matter what approach you choose, you want to consider the environment, how simple or complex you are, and how involved your key stakeholders can be or are willing to be. So just to kind of, again, go into detail about the pros and cons of each of these two methods, I would say waterfall, it's really great if you are in an industry where there's lots of regulation and you're going to have to compile a lot of documentation because the planning phase is quite intense up front. And it's nice to have all your key stakeholders involved at the beginning, and you can plot out all those requirements, and then they can be a little bit more hands-off as the actual work starts to take way. It's a great method to use when your project requirements are really fully understood up front, and your project is consistent and predictable. If there's any kind of change expected or volatile kind of environment, it gets a little riskier because there's tighter kind of change control elements you have to go through. And a potential con is, again, in software development, is that your clients don't get to really see the end product until planning has and development is pretty much all underway. Now, in an agile working environment, it's very collaborative and a fast iterative approach where you kind of analyze and test on a regular, most often 2-week sprint basis. But this kind of fast iterative process, again, really involves your key stakeholders being quite hands-on. There's less focus on documentation in an agile environment or approach, but you're, again, delivering kind of usable chunks of your end product faster. And so it's a nice way to kind of approach technology projects. I think when you use an agile approach, though, you have to really make sure there's the appetite for that, because it can be more expensive because you are involving more people often. And it's a little bit trickier to determine when your project is done because there's not that clear kind of cutoff phase. But that's not to say an agile project doesn't ever end. I think your kind of environment decides when the actual cost of continuing to develop this product outweighs the value the product itself can bring. That's the time to ensure you kind of wrap up on the project. Go through the project life cycle. These are the kind of 5 main phases of any project. And it's, again, iterative approach, no matter which method of project management you're following. So there's the initiation phase, planning, execution, monitor and control, and closing. And throughout each of these phases, you want to make sure that you're making significant decisions at each point and that there's clear milestones and documentation being met. More than half of unsuccessful projects are really just due to a breakdown in communication. And so throughout all those phases, you want to make sure that, again, the project manager's main responsibility is just to keep everyone informed on a regular basis and have a really solid communication plan. So I'll go through each one of these phases in a little more detail, but I'd like to do so with a specific example in mind. And just again, a little note, I did get permission to share. This is not some departmental deep secret. This was a part of a project plan that we submitted for an eCampus grant to develop a VR scuba application. And so this is just kind of a quick snapshot, and I'll make the font bigger on the next slides, where we can really look in detail at each one of those phases. So again, the project plan becomes important. It's really where you define all your goals and objectives and kind of fine tune each of the specific tasks for each phase. So you can identify who will be doing what and when. And so let's see. During the initiation stage, again, of this specific VR scuba application, at this point, we kind of knew the overall objective is to develop this VR app that will be used as a tool to manage stress and anxiety. You could learn about stress and anxiety, some common like tips of how to kind of self-manage those. And so during the initiation phase, it's just that idea where you now have to make sure you have the project manager assigned, that you have the financial resources committed, and that you've identified each one of your kind of key players that need to become a part of this phase. Let's see. It's really important during this kind of initiation phase that you have all the key stakeholders at the table right away. That really helps along the project's progress to ensure everyone has that common understanding. And it really helps when you've actually developed then the end product. You get their buy-in a lot better and faster because they've been involved from the beginning. Also helps with the scope creep because again, all these details become part of your project charter. And you can always refer back to that we have this common agreement up front that these were the things we would deliver. And that kind of just becomes your roadmap to refer back to. So again, specifically in this VR scuba application, this first phase is where we decided we would need to start getting involved, not only scuba experts, but experts that had experience in treating stress and anxiety that could help bring some kind of really valid tips and tools for learners to use. We then were able to partner with a local VR company that can help with the development of it. And then we have to work out the kind of details about reporting structures because this was an eCampus grant. We would need the partners to report into DFM, and the DFM reports back up to eCampus, the funding source. So that's again where the PM or the project manager becomes kind of integral in making sure all those players are connected. In the planning phase, you start to break down your projects into more specific tasks and chunks so you can prepare a more detailed schedule and start releasing some of your your financial components of the project. So this is where we start to really define the scope and the effort that's required to achieve the end goal. And it can be iterative in process because there is a lot of that back and forth, especially again in this app where you have to start writing scripts and making sure all those elements are involved. You want to plan those out properly. As the story starts to come together of this VR game, you could start to see that there would be elements of design that could be custom designed, where there's other areas where you can just purchase virtual assets to be included in the game. And so all those kinds of conversations are really being planned out at this level. And let's see, then you can go into the execution phase. So the execution phase of any project is really where the bulk of your money will be spent, as you need to actually do the work, to pay the team members to be involved and to be committed to doing their part. You have to start purchasing the equipment or any kind of digital assets that were needed. You have to make sure that everyone's kind of getting the same message. So, you know, you might have all the key players meeting and directing people, but at the design level, if you didn't have all those people there, they might be designing a virtual shark that is more cartoonish Disney-like shark, where in this project, the whole point is to try to induce a bit of stress so you can then practice some of the breathing techniques or other stress management techniques that could be included. And so it's important, again, with that communication, that everyone has that same understanding of what their specific work looks like as a component of this larger project. This is also where you might need to go back and update your original plan, especially in this particular project happened over COVID. And so there was many elements that obviously we weren't prepared for in terms of like test sessions could no longer be with many people in one place, or sometimes couldn't happen at all. And so then you have to not only develop the VR app, but now a computer playthrough so people can access remotely. Sometimes even procuring the VR headsets became an issue because of supply chain issues, or certain subject matter experts weren't as available as they once were because now they have to go back to prioritizing their clinical duties. So those are all kind of the unknowns that you have to make sure you're actively monitoring to ensure your objectives, again, are still met on time. And then we go to, of course, the monitor and control phase. This is where, again, you're checking in on everyone's progress, financially, your time-wise, performance issues, if any have arisen. This might also be where you start to realize some of the quality is less than what is desired, or the tolerance for it. So again, for example, let's say we have the dive master in the game. We needed someone on staff to record that voice. And maybe that you realize after the fact, okay, their tone or their professionalism wasn't quite as what we're looking for to be included in that app. And so maybe we need to actually hire a true voice actor as opposed to using one that we thought we had available. Again, this is where you kind of mitigate all the COVID implications on your project and ensure that you're still running smoothly. And then we have the closing phase here. I think before you even reach the closing phase of a project, there's some elements to consider. Again, if you've partnered with external companies that are really just working for you on this project, you want to make sure that as they realize, oh, my job's almost done here, I need to secure my income for the next 6 months, that they don't leave your project high and dry, right? So that's also part of the project management, where you're making sure everyone is continuing to stay as involved as they should be, or if there's ways to bring them in on other projects so you don't lose those key resources, you want to kind of keep a pulse on that. This is where all the documentation that you've been doing throughout, identifying risks, identifying your stakeholders, that this all becomes part of your closing documentation, because as a part of handover, you're not just handing over this VR application, okay, here you go, use it. You want to make sure there's training sessions, user guides that have been created, kind of, especially for eCampus, as it ultimately became an open resource for learning for people across Ontario. You want to make sure they know how to get the application installed on their own headsets. So there's lots of moving parts that you want to ensure are included with handover. And of course, lessons learned, because if this is just going to be one of many tools that are developed, you just want to keep getting better and more efficient and continue to do what worked well, but avoid things that were challenges. And so with any project, there are variables to manage. I think most people are aware of triple constraints. I actually like to say there's 6 that you have to kind of manage, whether that's the scope, budget, schedule, risk, quality, and benefits. We often draw out this triangle in project management whenever there's critical decisions that need to be made, because it's important to know that if you change any one of these elements, something else on the triangle has to give. There's really no other way around it. So if you are saying you need the VR project delivered faster, well then, okay, that means you either have to give me more money so we can hire more people to help make that happen, or we can reduce some of the requirements of what the actual game experience feels like and looks like, or you're risking some possibilities of the quality of the game might be more, might include some more bugs, or hasn't been fully tested because now you're trying to rush the end work. So again, any kind of best practices for project management. I think in in the academic world especially, there's such a hierarchy of different roles that can be involved in your project that your project manager might be putting not undue, but they might be hyper-focused on, we need to complete this project on time and within budget, where a functional manager is probably more concerned about the content excellence or the technical functions of the tool. And so again, that's where the PMO or top management can then come in and help carefully balance those. And you want to make sure that no matter how well or not well your project is progressing, that you have this kind of continuous business justification throughout. If something's not going well, then fail fast. Make sure that if things can't be justified, or if something's not going well anymore, that you either stop the bleeding, kind of redistribute your funds elsewhere where you're getting more bang for your buck. And that's really a best practice. You got to know when to say that this is no longer worth the investment. Again, throughout your project, I think you need to make sure you have a great risk analysis from the beginning to the end, that you identify issues in a matrix style, even where you list them all out and say what your contingency plans are for each, who's responsible for enacting the contingency plans should it need to be moved forward on. Because all of this again can become, whether they actually happen or not, it becomes part of your lessons learned for future projects and for other people to kind of learn from. And then of course, the same with the communication plans. You want to make sure that is solidly laid out. It's often said that project management is 80% communication. And that's why if it goes wrong, it's typically communications problem. So you want to just make sure again that everyone's always aware of all the moving parts and any risks that may have arisen, or any key decision points that need to be made. And there we go. So when you have wrapped up your project, or you're in the closing phase, I think it's important to get all players of the game into one kind of lessons learned session. Now, these can vary anywhere from a couple of hours of a meeting or a full day event, with every player of the team, from design, from any audio editors, your subject matter experts, and anyone that was involved. You want to hear from everybody's perspective at the same time. What processes worked well, what didn't, what are they proud of, what are they not? Would they do it again if they had the opportunity? Or what advice would they give for someone else that is stepping into their shoes in a similar role? Again, if you don't actually change anything in your future projects, then it wasn't really a lesson learned. So it's kind of the advice I would give when anyone's and going forward with project management. And so with all that kind of general knowledge in mind, I think I will hand it over now to Hounaida to discuss the research component, and I will just stop sharing my screen here. Let's see.
Thanks, Marisa.
Yeah, got it.
I think. Can we see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So thanks, Marisa, for laying the ground and doing the tough version of the presentation. And good evening, everyone. In the next section, I'll focus on the presentation on the particularity of the research projects, as opposed to the general management project that Marisa covered. And I will guide you through the most common steps and elements of this. So let me start with this Einstein quote. If we knew what we're doing, we wouldn't call it research, would we? And I chose this quote because it really highlights the main foundation of research project. And that is that the research starts because we don't know the answer to a particular question. In project management, as Marisa explained, you usually start with knowing what you want and you tailor your team and your project to get to that end. Whereas in research, you don't know the answer. So it's the opposite, and you have a problem that needs to be solved. You have a theory that has to be verified or a question to be answered. But as you don't know the answer, you aim to find that with that process. So in a way, it's a way to discover how we enhance our understanding of something of interest to us, or to check if our grasp of this topic is accurate or complete. So while general project management and research project management have the same backbone that Marisa talked about, of the initiation, the planning, the execution, monitoring, and closure, there are particularities to this research, and this is mostly due to the nature and the purpose of the research, as well as the standards to which research is attached. So research in that point can be divided into academic and professional. Professional is aligning more with the regular project, and it's usually to solve a specific problem for an organization or a client, whereas academic research usually results in confirming or disproving or creating new discoveries. And I'll focus the presentation on the academic research because this is what's happening at DFM. Research is not designed to benefit a specific organization, and at DFM, our work is not tailored the research to benefit DFM per se, but the more pool of knowledge or the specialty and sector that the research is working about. So the specifics about research is that it employs purely scientific methods. So you follow the same pattern throughout to find the most logical conclusion to a hypothesis that you propose. And it is held to a very high standard. This is, for one, because all research usually include data or participant of biological human element or animal elements. And for two, because findings from the academic research can and will alter how people, be it the general public or policymakers or professional, will view, understand, or practice in that area that's being researched. Just think about how research in the health field affected both our understanding and our own way of living during the pandemic, and how political decisions were dependent on medical advice during this period. So, as the research question often involves, like I said, a human or biological subject with varying degrees of risk and implications, it must follow the strictest ethical practice and protocols. How the data about the studied subject is acquired, how it's analyzed, how it's used, stored, and eventually deleted will determine whether your research will get the green light, whether it will be adopted for policy, or whether it will be later accepted for publication. So therefore, you as a researcher need to ensure that these steps of data acquisition, analysis, use, and storage are in line with the current regulations and protocols before you can embark on your journey. So having the research in line with these existing guidelines will ensure also that your research can be replicated and therefore trusted. So any other researcher who need to be able to arrive to the same results if they followed the same steps and procedure that you explained and did in your work. Having also a solid and replicable work will also open the door to having your research work accepted in peer-reviewed journals. And peer-reviewed journals, as was previously covered in research fields, they subject the procedure and findings of your work to intense scrutiny by experts in the specific studied subject. And only when they found valid would they accept to publish your research. So this is, just to illustrate the particularity of a research project compared to a project management, whereas you have clearly defined phase and task, like Marisa explained. In research, you'll find that most of the phases and the tasks overlap specifically with actually designing the research itself and coming up with the research question. You will find that they are very particular and unique to their settings and to the team and the studied unit and researcher area, whereas project management is just repetitive and you can bring it in from a different area. In opposition to project management, it's inter-organizational, which means they don't rarely, if ever, relate to an external client or customer. And it's more about different bodies and entities within the organization or the field of study. And very particular to research is that the manager or the PI, who's the principal investigator, is not trained in project management. And though they may have some knowledge about it, often they lack specific project management skills, and they learn as they go about and they start with their own project. And in fact, most researchers, as most of you would know, they have other competing and possibly conflicting obligations with their times. They're either teaching, they have their clinical work, and it is the chunk of their time. So research often comes as a third or fourth priority with very limited time and very limited experience per se. And the main two differences in this table that I want you to take away is going back to Einstein's code, is that a research project starts from a discussion about the framework of what will be done, in contrast to development projects where the requirements of the client are put and discussed ahead of time. And the fundamental difference, which the PI must learn to accept, is that the result of the research project may be negative, but it's still something worthwhile putting through. So for example, if a research project indicated that a program is not feasible or a certain treatment is not working, accepting such a positive negative result may be difficult for the researcher and discouraging, but it is rather a very common output and a useful one nonetheless. So what are the steps to do research? If you read research management books and websites, you'll find a variety of models. You'll have the 3 steps and the 5 steps and the 3x5 and the 4x6. But you get the idea. There are many, many forms to follow. But the good news is that all the roads lead to Rome. And this is just one of the illustration of the common method of following project management. And there are many steps in most of them. There are sequential, interrelated, codependent. You come back to one of them and another, like I said, they're interrelated a lot. But as far as I'm concerned, my plan for you is just start. That's the most important part. And starting means that you have to have a very clear and objective and scope for your project. And that's the most important step I find. So in project planning, this includes the writing of a research proposal, whereas in project execution, you will produce the progress or technical report. And the final phase is where you do the final report and the presentation of your findings. Again, in the first phase, it is very important to clearly define what you're doing. So you said about choosing your research topic. And once you know what you want to work on, whether a clinical trial or a medical education issue or social equity and health project, whatever it is, you will need to narrow it down and zoom in on the specific topic that you're interested in and knowledgeable about. So let's say, for an example, if you're interested in pediatrics and social aspects of this field, maybe you want to do an exploratory project where you study an element of the social life for the sake of argument, let's say educational level and specific pediatrics population, say primary school children in Ontario. And with that, you still don't have a very clear question. You will need to identify the question that you wanted answered or clarified. So for example, you can go for how does an educational level in that specific group of children correlates with their physical or mental health. And from that, you need to go even deeper and develop a much clearer hypotheses in question. And you can do that by consulting the literature, identifying what has been done in the field, what are the gaps, the recommendation, what has worked before, what are the common or interesting questions and methodology used, and then you formulate your own specific questions based on that, on your interest, on your capabilities, and on consulting with advisors and colleagues and authority figures in that field. So you could, for example, ask, are the primary children in east of Ottawa with low educational attainment level be more likely to have more physical health problems than children with high attainment level? And with such question, you also need to be very clear and have a very good definition of what each element of the question means. So what is high or low educational attainment? Is it grades? Is it grades and enrollment activity? Is it both? Is it something else that we don't know? You need to identify what you mean by primary level kids. Is it all kids in KG and first cycle? Is it, indigenous population? Is it female only? So all of this have to be clearly identified. You need to identify the East, Ottawa region, expanding from where to where. The physical health, are you looking for acute or chronic health or both? Are you going to include some mental health issues that reflect on physical matters? So all of this needs to be defined. How are you going to measure your, the physical health? Is it based on visits to GP? Is it from the school record? Is it from declared diseases by the parents? So all of this needs to be identified and well worked out from the beginning so that you can set out the methodology to get the answer to this question. And again, with methodology, you always fall back on the done literature review and the consultation and communication with your colleagues and people in the field, all the while acknowledging the resources that you have or may not have, so that you can design a research project and decide for that specific question, for example, whether reviewing children's school records should be enough, the medical and the academic, or whether you need to, let's say, interview children, maybe even their parents and educators and their GPs to get a clearer idea. Or maybe you find that you'll get to, readjust your whole question and consider a retrospective study where you look at the history of older children during their primary years, because the documentation would be more complete and you would maybe add another perspective of whether it gets better with age or not. So after you've done this, you get to the practical matters, securing funds, getting the ethic board's approval. And this has been covered in a previous workshop in this series. And you identify grants you're eligible for by looking at your affiliations and your entitlement within your university, clinic, or hospital that you work in. And you can check, provincial and national funds that can be open to you, and you start the application. And at this point in the process, you need to have your research proposal ready. So what is the research proposal? Basically, it's the document which purpose is to seek the approval of your supervisor, of your funding agency, of your REB, whoever it is meant to. And it also helps you as a researcher understand better your project once you put down in writing and better organized, and you understand more the tasks and matters that you need to be considering. The forms of the research proposal is usually strict, and the procedures and guidelines are more stringent than the project proposal, again, because of the issues that we talked about. And as such, you need to have a comprehensive literature review and provision of substantial methodological and ethical evidence is required at this step. So as mentioned, the form and the guidelines, they differ, but often there's a template provided by either the academic institution or the funding agency or even the research board. But more or less, even if you don't have a template, they all follow the structure of having an introduction, a research aim, approach, details, and conclusion. And I'll break these down for you. So in the first section, you typically would provide the rationale and the background on what your project is all about and how it came to be. So you engage in a very intense review of the previous work and research done on the subject, and you formulate and contextualize your own interest and identified gap with the literature. So you say, I want to target this gap, or I want to implement this successful program within my department or my clinic. And usually, additionally, at this step, we also provide the structure of the proposal and what you're going to be talking about later on. Sorry. So, as I mentioned, I emphasized clear, concise aims and objective, and very specific research question will make the whole process much, much easier down the line. So the formulation of the question, like I said, a very intensive literature review that's continuous, that's deep, that involves different people, including input from other authority figures and colleagues. But equally, your research question has to be realistic. It has to be not have been done already, so you're not repeating something there. And importantly, you have to have that the answers you are seeking is needed. Like your research is of relevance, is of importance, it's going to make a difference. Because we all have like grandiose ideas about things we want to explore, but often you find that, you know, it's not really needed because it's not helpful to have it. You should also see that if there are available solutions already to the problem you're interested in, that your proposed solution for this project has to be justifiably either better or different. And very important, I find that the research question really has to be of interest and value to you as a researcher, because you need to maintain a high level of commitment and the perseverance to overcome obstacles as they will arise. So what are the different types of research and research questions? I mean, there are a gazillion types, but I find it easier if, you know, this is able to make life easier for you, that you can divide them according to the basis. So I find the first category of research is identified according to its purpose. So it can be theoretical or applied. So theory, you're looking at, you know, philosophical kind of dissertation, and applied technological or scientific kind of research would be mostly used in STEM research and things like that. If you divide them based on the depth of the scope, you have the exploratory, where you're just exploring a phenomena that is not very well known or not very well studied. In explanatory, you kind of, this is the most common type of research method, to be honest, and is responsible to establish the cause and the effect relationship that would allow you to generalize your finding to similar realities. Whereas descriptive is just, you're defining the characteristic of a particular phenomena or group of people, and not necessarily looking at the causes that produce this phenomena or the structure for people. So for example, you could look at, you know, the views of medical educators on a specific topic, problem-based learning, for example, something of the sort. And correlation is you identify the relationship between two or more different variables. When you divide them by type of data, you'll have, you know, the typical, the qualitative, more descriptive, and the quantitative, where you use mathematical and statistical or computer-aided tools to measure your collected data. And usually this allows more generalized conclusion to be projected over time and in different situations. If you divide them according to the degree of manipulation of variables, you'll have the experimental, where your study population is divided into, you know, experimental group and control group. So you're actually changing the variable, you're manipulating the variable, which is, for example, the typical is medications. You'll have a group where you're giving them placebo medication, you have a group with low dose medication, and you have a group of high dose medication. Non-experimental is, you can do it also for medication studies but you're just observing what's happening. So the actual, you know, treatment is to give some people low dose and other people high dose, and you just observe what's happening. So you're not manipulating any of the data, you're just observing what's happening in an experiment. And the quasi is, it's the same as experimental, but you don't do any random assignment. And this is to ensure that the collected data is relevant and that the knowledge, perspective, and opinions can be incorporated into the study. With the type of inferences, you're looking at how the data is collected. So you're doing it deductively, which is, we know, you know, the general laws pointing into certain conclusions. So if all spiders have 8 legs, tarantula is a spider, then tarantula have 8 legs, that kind of reasoning. In the inductive, it's the other way around, where you're going from an observation, a particular observation, to do a generalization. So if I notice that I get sick around, you know, people with cold, then my hypothesis is that cold are infectious, and I need to test this. The hypothetical deductive investigation is a little bit more complicated, and it's based on observing a reality, and you make a hypothesis. Then you use deduction to obtain a conclusion, and finally you verify it through an experiment. So it's a combination of a lot of things. With the time that's carried out, you have the longitudinal or diachronic studies, which is you monitoring the same event or individual or group over a defined period of time, or the other one, which is the cross-sectional or synchronous study, which is study at a specific given time. So any current study that's being done. According to the the source of the information, you have the primary, where you're creating a collected, directly collected data, like you do, I don't know, PCRs or Western blots or interviews, and these are, you've done these steps yourself, and the data you're collecting it primarily, or secondary data, which are generally looking into data from another source. Let's say you're looking at the medical charts that already exist and you're extracting data, or and they're usually based on, or you're doing a literature review, so you're looking at documents that are already out there and you're using that. And finally, the last step is basis is how the data is obtained. Either there's documentary, field, laboratory, or mixed, as with the name. With the documentary, you're collecting from existing sources and making sense of it. In the fields, you're going out to a field, a location, a population, and collecting, observing phenomena. In laboratory, doesn't mean just laboratory. It means that you have a controlled environment where the experiments or the observation is happening, and mixed method is a compilation of both. But of all of these kind of type of research questions and methodology, the take is that you're doing either a descriptive, a relational, or causal. So you're either describing an event, a process, a person, or you're trying to study the relationship that exists between different elements and in which direction that relationship goes, or you're trying to get the cause. And more than often, research does not do with one simple question. It's a combination of questions and methods in the majority of times. Which brings us to the methodology. Again, sorry. So you're looking at, you identified the question, you made it very clear, concise, you understood the type of it, and consequently the kind of methodology that you will be using. And you could decide on the methodology with two ways. You can either do it by elimination. So, you have a list of possible methodologies that you identified in the literature or you've had recommendation for, and, you eliminate it based on, the financial aid that you have, the resources that you have, the scope of the project, the capability of your investigator and whatnot. Or it can be deductively, which means you build on similarity in previous works and you shape that approach of yours. In this section of the proposal, you have to lay out your methodology and, and you have to kind of talk about the design, but you also have to specify the type of study, the sample, or, the targeted population that you're aiming to study, and your analysis. So what tests are to be done, what statistical packages would be used, and so on. With the fourth section of the proposal, you should cover all the project specificities. You give details about procedures and technicality and, implementation issues. What are the challenges? What are the deliverables that you're hoping to get out of this? And for this, you specifically talk about your team, who are your members, their duties and functions. You should specify your timeline, all the activities that will be involved, and the start and end time for each, and the budget that should cover, the cost of equipment, whether purchase or rental, the salaries of the people who will be working, fees for publication, application fees, all of this have to be included in the budget. And the final section of the proposal wraps up the whole proposal, restating the key elements and the intended input with all the references that were used to formulate the proposal. So let's talk about these different topics. The team. You need a team. Honestly, you need a dream team, because otherwise your project will not happen. So who are your teams? It's you as the principal investigator, your co-investigator, because often research are, either multi-centric or involve different departments, or simply you need the, the advising and the collaboration of a different colleague. You might be going on holiday, the research takes 3 years. So you need to have co-investigators who are equally vested in this. And you have, the research assistants, coordinators, analysts, whatever the case is. You need to identify them, how many you need for each category with them, which task is done by whom. And they need to be people who are not only qualified for the task that they will be responsible for, but equally important, you need them to be interested, one, available, two, and committed. So vet your potential team members for this and be very clear with them from the beginning what will be required of them. And ideally, you should have an advisory committee from whom to ask feedback from the start and throughout the project. You will also need to identify if you're working like intra-organizational, which is the main university or organization that will be funding or supporting this process, and be clear with them about what you need to do and what needs to be done. And also sometimes the ultimate aim or publisher or event that you're targeting can influence kind of your team and your choices. And this is just an example of the timeline that you might have in a proposal. What to take from this is that you have to be generous and realistic at the same time with the timeline. And you need to realize that some steps are prerequisite to others, so your timeline needs to respect this and reflect it. So in research, there's no way you can start recruiting or doing any sampling before you get all the necessary ethics approval or exemptions. So, and to do that, you need to formulate for the ethics board, your protocol, your consent form, your study tool, your questionnaire, your recruitment material, if you have flyers, email invitation, letters, and so on, they all have to be done and presented to the ethics board before, so that you can proceed with the remaining part of the project, the execution part. So just briefly, because this has been covered before, you just need to identify the correct board for the ethics and whether your study can be exempted or not, and apply with all the necessary documents that have been formulated. As an advice, properly label, properly date, properly update these documents, and keep a clean and tracked version of each, track change version of each. The usual delegated form, I think, takes between 4 to 8 weeks on average, and usually you have requests to do some revisions or another 2-4 weeks after the submission of revisions. So usually allow at least 3 to 6 months for the RED process before you start recruitment and data collection. Data collection, so your study unit. It's in consultation with your team. You have to be and decide and be very clear about the inclusion and exclusion criteria, who or what is included, who and what is excluded, and this has to be justified and reasoned to align with your study objectives and methodology, as well as its feasibility. And what I found working in the department, that often researchers aim very high, expecting high response rate, but often more than not, study subjects, which for the majority usually are human beings, are not that responsive to research, especially during the pandemic now. People are overloaded, people have many things to do. Some particular population are hard to reach as well. So some are not simply interested or incentivized to contribute. Some just forget to reply. So this is why you need to consider different avenues to recruitment, and in practice, build very good relationship and reach out and leverage to your network who can suggest, facilitate, or even improve the recruitment process. Therefore, you need to be prepared to be very flexible and to think outside the box for this step. And in this step, the most important thing for you to do as well is to ensure their consent in written or verbally, recorded. So to get consent, participants need few things to be done. They need to be very well informed about the purpose of the study, the benefits generally of the study and particularly to them, and if any of the risk that may exist to them. They also need to be aware of any extra incentives. So these incentives need to be justified as enough to encourage them, but not high enough to skew participation level dramatically. And these such incentives could be, to compensate participants for their fees incurred for them. For example, when you ask, a group of people to come for a focus group, you need to cater for, the bus fare or the car park. You need to provide food and beverage for them during the experiment or the interview or whatnot. Sometimes you could provide some of the study elements. So maybe in the VR, you can give them a VR set if it's allowed, or, scale, notebooks, recording device, whatever it is that, would push them to be more involved. And sometimes it could be monetary, like gift receipts or something, just to nudge them slightly into participation. Speaking of incentive, brings us to budget, which should account for all of this, you know, the personnel, the staff, the equipment, the incentives, fees. So, and it should be always in line, you know, with the provincial or departmental approved fees for, especially for employing staff and purchasing of equipment or renting. And resources to cover these fees can be found in grants and funds at various levels, from the international, you know, companies and organizations to the local departmental level, which can also provide, you know, expertise and help volunteers or hired personnel. And I will cover this at DFM at the end of the presentation, and I'm assuming you're going to have a copy of this presentation sent to you later on. So we've done this. This is a typical timeline from inception to closure for any projects generally. You know, you start by formulating the question, you design the project, you create the team, you got the application for funds, you've done the REB exemption or approval. You move on to, ideally, at this point, it is ideal if you can run a pilot test for the study. You iron out and fine tune the various details and practical matters that are bound to happen in most research. Often you find that you will have to readjust your plan, and sometimes you have to apply for ethics amendment approval as well. So please keep record of everything, like I said, your application, your response, clearly labeled, and they need to be appropriately stored as approved by ethics board and as is practical to your team for sharing. Get in the habit of keeping a research logbook or journal where you record procedures, obstacles encountered, unnecessary steps that we can take them out, sorry, events that are worthwhile noting, findings that are interesting but not directly related. You can, you know, push the project further or move on to another one with that. And a very, very useful advice, going back to the communication point that Marisa brought up, write quarterly and yearly progress reports and self-imposed checkpoints of meeting with the team at different points in time. These reports are usually anyway required by your funding agency generally, but if it's also important for you to do them if they're not required, because it helps you check on how the project is proceeding and if there's a change of direction that is needed, and it keeps you in touch with all the different team members of your project. And finally, having done all of this and done the collection, you know, proceeded with the execution, the final step culminates with you formulating the answer to your question by writing your final report. Be it the funding agency or, you know, manuscript, policy report, whatever it is that you're looking at. And at this point, you should submit what's called an REB closure form, which should only be done once all data collection and sampling are completely closed. So, as it has been illustrated over and over again with any presentation on research, the infamous iceberg. While there's a lot of steps and frustrations and foundation that are below the glorious tiny visible portion of the iceberg, research is still very rewarding and important facet, especially in the medical field. But I won't leave you with that. I will finish this section with highlighting essential and relevant points to conduct research. Spend time on your research question. I can't highlight this enough. It is well defined, clear, and concise. And always remember, negative findings are still findings and you should not be discouraged by that. Engage in reviewing the literature from the onset. Make sure that the process is frequent. You keep going back to the literature, that it's broad. It covers, you know, a very broad range about your question. It's deep, you're delving, that's where you identify the gaps and the methodology, and it's well managed. So, you know, especially if different people are involved, you have a good citation management process in place. Make friend of technology. There are many free available tools, you know, to create lists and calendars. There are apps and programs to make your life easier. You have to try and choose between them, so to find out which is the most suitable for your specific needs. And some of these apps are also usually provided by the department. So check what they have available as well. And choose a sharing platform early on so that you don't have many files and many versions and you're not sure who got what and who's working on which version. So choose that sharing platform early on in the project. Ideally, plan your project, you know, per day, per week, per semester to basically cover 75% of your time, allowing a little bit of flexibility if things went different so that you can, you know, rework things. And like I said, always do, progress checking through regular reporting to yourself and with your team member, and use self-assigned checkpoints. So always create this research logbook that helps you, knowing when you need to meet up, and organize regular meeting with your team anyway. And specifically to research, I find that it's great if you can have an output logbook where you can list, the conferences attended, the abstracts, posters submitted, if you have any presentation resulting from your research manuscript completed. This will also help you with writing your CV, with updating your knowledge and all of this. So just in the slide, I list the tools that some of them I have used specifically to facilitate different aspects of the project, and some of them came recommended by different people. Of course, this is not exclusive, and really sometimes even a very, an old-fashioned actual calendar or a simple Excel sheet will do the work. So really find what works for you. And most of these tools, are free for most of the functions, and some of them are fully supported by URL as well. So for citation management, personally, I use Atelier. I've used EndNote. Oops, there's a typo. Anyway, it's EndNote, ENDNOT. Mendeley and Providence. For collaborative platforms, you can use the Dropbox, the Microsoft Team, Google Docs, Causes.bit. Project management, there's the Gantt Pro, Trello, Airtable, Workflow, Workday. To help you organize different things. And again, say example, the Gantt is highly sophisticated if you have big budgets and, many, many different teams in different areas. So if you need a huge one, Excel would work if it's a small team with a small budget. Anyway. And in research writing, you can use things like Scrivener or Typeset or Grammarly to check for plagiarism, to help you with, grammar and writing up. And even in the literature and, some basic citation management as well. Specifically to DFM, there are many resources. So if you go to the Ozone, you have the Fast My Research link, which has a lot of tools. You have the research toolbox on the third link. You have also a research management service provided by the department. So just click there and ask for help. You have many, many funds for different, levels of research for different areas, and they're available on this third link. You have the DIME, which provides, general and overwhelming research support for researchers. If you're looking, to hire an assistant or some specialties, you have the Family Medicine Resident Scholarly Project, the FMRSP, or the COOP. Availability, and of course you have your IT and librarian assistants from the department available at this link, so use them. And basically this is when I want to thank you for your patience and hope we have provided a good outlook on project and research management in general, and hopefully we gave you a realistic but still positive message to get you encouraged to actually join the research world. So thank you very much. And if there's any question, please let us know.
Thank you so much, Marisa and Hounaida. So I'll just open the floor if there's any questions. S'il y a des questions, s'il vous plaît, les poser à nos deux présentatrices. So vous pouvez soit lever la fonction de la main ou j'essaie d'écrire dans le clavardage. Je vois Sylvie, tu as la main levée?
Oui, j'avais une petite question. Hounaida, I really liked your slide with all the different tools that the IT support reference. For yourself, with the type of projects you manage, do you have one that you prefer over the others in terms of how to track the progress of a research project? Is there one that's easier to use that you prefer?
Thanks, Cecily. Great question. Like I said, it really varies on the scope of the projects, and mostly the ones I've been involved with are, one center. Usually I used to use the Gantt Pro because a template of it, so not dealing with the financial issues. So that was my go-to, but now I'm using the Excel.
I think on our side at the university too, we use something called Smartsheet, which it's easier than maybe Microsoft Project, where you really have to kind of know that tool in and out to manage the complexities of that software. But Smartsheet is very user-friendly and can automate certain workflows, so people are getting notified about their tasks right away. So And that's easily obtainable here at the university, should you need a license to that.
But I've actually got a question for both of you. I think many people that are here today, they've got the proposal, either it's been funded, they've got the project, and it's really about project execution and the refinement, because we always find that we have that timeline set, that Gantt chart, and things don't go according to plan, or we lose track of things, and we find, okay, who on the team is responsible for what. So that was one question that I had. Some tips and some strategies for helping cope with that, because a little rain will fall on every study, and we've got to have plans. So I mean, these tools that you just mentioned now, I think are great, for helping with that, to keep the study on track.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing that I was wondering if we could sort of have a discussion around is around data management, in terms of the overall project management, because more and more we're finding now that when we go to publish, where's your data? To hold you accountable. So what are some means that we can provide that data management? I know, like, a paper that Maddie and I are on, for example, the publisher's asking, okay, can you make this data available in case someone wants to replicate your study? So, those are just two, just as you've been talking through, two things that came to mind.
To the team, that's why we said from the beginning, identify the stakeholders that you're interested in and make sure they're vested from the beginning and available. So you set out, this is, part of the proposal where you write in who's on the team and what are they doing, and you get them involved from the beginning, explaining exactly what's required for them. And also you support this with the regular meetings. So, the rain will come, but if you're meeting frequently, it's not a deluge, it's not, a storm. So you're already hopefully one step ahead. You're seeing that things aren't happening in this way, so you can alter. And if you have an advisory committee or person that you fall back on, you can always ask for that advice with things. And like I said, with the department, I'm part of the research team, and we're always happy to, engage with a project that we're not in, but can help with. So that's in that term. In data management, like I said, planning for me is key, because when you have things planned ahead of time, it's easier to kind of gauge the problems later on and work around them. So if you've already have a system for sharing the document, if you've already established the consent protocol with your sample, if you've already gotten all of this cleared with the research ethics board and with your funding agency and with your participants, and you have a good storage mechanism for this data and everything is properly labeled and shared, then that wouldn't be even a problem to start with. Once problem have, it's quite specific, I assume, to every project and to every detail. So it has to be looked into the specificities of these issues to be able to answer this. But again, support is there. And I find it often that people are happy, to help, especially like I'm talking about, research field with professional people. They're more than happy to help out and, go the extra mile to work things out for you. So reach out, leverage your network, connect with different people who've been through something similar. And I think that would be sorted out.
I totally agree with what you said there, Hounaida. It's in terms of finding, like, staying, keeping that close pulse on the health of the project. Yeah, you can't kind of overemphasize just how kind of clear and black and white your action items need to be. So there is no guessing about who does what, and you're not leaving anything open to kind of just being implied, like, oh, I thought you were doing that. Like, no, not only is it said in the meeting, but in your documentation and within your I don't know, in my case, smart sheets where you can see who's going where, and until it's actually actively checked off and Smartsheet's cool. It's kind of like it's kind of like Excel and how you set it up, that you can actually upload each document within your line item too. So you're storing stuff within there. And then as far as long-term data management, this is kind of where the project manager and research assistants kind of work together, because they're more, they have ideas of the kind of restrictions that maybe perhaps I wouldn't be aware of in the corporate world, but there's the SharePoint environments where you can get down very granular about who has access to what and when, and that's again one place where everyone's working from around the world, and you can actually collaborate on a document on the same line and try to move things along properly there. And it's a lot more convenient than just sending items back and forth between email and then losing what version you're on and that kind of thing. So.
Thank you. And Hounaida, I found something that you said very helpful in terms of that ongoing documentation, so that you learn from your mistakes, because we all make mistakes in projects. And the important thing is we don't do it twice.
Exactly. And like you said, we have to remember that, researchers are not project managers. They haven't taken a course. They're not doing it. So they're going to learn by trial and error and by talking to people who've been with this before. So like reaching out to your network is quite crucial at the beginning, I find, and throughout, of course.
A comment in the chat, I think, Dr. Viner. So he said he certainly wished that he had sessions on this when he was first appointed as a full-time, academic. So some excellent tools, and many of which are new to me. And I will be sharing the slide deck with all of you folks and afterwards, so you can actually access the links and tools. And he's asking, he's still unclear about the project management role of the research assistant. So I don't know if either Hounaida or Marisa can elaborate about the research assistant and their role in project management.
That's exactly going back to Doug's point, is that you could need a research assistant in your project to, I don't know, just send emails or collect samples or, reach out to people or whatever it is. It's your job as the project manager, as the principal investigator, to decide how much of a help you need, how many, and what's their function. So again, with the proposal research that you should formulate, you should be able to kind of gauge how many research assistants are they going to be doing the analysis? Are they just going to, be taking phone calls only? Are they going to go on the field, and do collection? So the project manager decides on the function of each member. So the management of the process is unfortunately all on the PI, and that's why having co-PIs also help to get some of the load off, to get some of the experience that they might have. But managing the project and deciding who's doing what is the PI's job usually.
As we wrap up, I just want to take the opportunity, since I do have Hounaida and Marisa on the line here, perhaps if you can expand in terms of like, how can folks engage with the project management office or the research office to leverage our support or your support to get those projects progressing well? Are you there accessible to provide guidance in terms of tools, or can they insert a budget item to be able to have some funds to actually receive some support from the office? So just expand a bit on that so folks are aware.
Yeah, I think, always we're here to either just collaborate, run ideas by us. Like I said, the PMO in general could take a variety of different roles in your project and provide support. So I think definitely the first step is just send an email and we can work from there. And then as far as whether the department kind of comes on board and becomes part of your actual project team in any capacity, I think, those are decisions probably a little bit higher than my head, but certainly can make sure I'm pointing people in the right direction. And then it's just a matter of balancing kind of departmental needs of what projects we undertake in that capacity. But again, even if you're looking to build that kind of A team you're with, we can definitely network with you and put some key players on your team. So
absolutely. I mean, I'm not Mr. T, and I don't have all the questions, the answers to all the questions. But if I don't, I will, work hard to direct you to the person who can help you. But like Marisa said, the first point is reach out We're here for you. Department is available, email, phone, reach out any way that's possible for you, whatever the question is, whether you're starting up or in the middle of it. And we're more than happy to oblige to help or direct you where you can get the best help possible.
Yeah, that's again, as the PMO here is kind of newly created, I will vow to kind of share any of the lessons learned sessions that were going on. So you're just that one step kind of ahead of the game, being able to learn any kind of challenges we encountered. So I'm happy to share that broadly with people.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, Marisa and Hounaida, for sharing your experience. Yeah, and some project management resources and tips. And I'll thank everyone for attending tonight. And the recording will also be available. And I'll share the link tomorrow with the certificate of attendance so you can have access to that. Excellent. Well, have a lovely evening, everyone.